dreamer to put the world to rights. I stay home forever, but two and two always makes a five.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Crim 861, the remote pandemic version. Thank you all for enrolling in this class. My name's Evan McCush. Obviously I'm the instructor for this course. And for this week one, we'll be doing a sort of short and sort of sweet introduction to Crim 861, including my philosophy for the course, how you're going to receive course material, how you'll engage with that material. We'll talk about how you'll be graded, and we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming assignment that will be due next week that requires you to get a data set that you will use to complete the assignments for this course. So to start with the basics, we'll just talk a little bit about contact information for myself. So first and foremost, if you have like very simple clarification questions that require just like a yes or no, feel free to send me an email, ecm2evan_mccush@sfu.ca. Both of those email addresses work. They get sent to the same place. I'll also have Zoom-based office hours, and those will be on a Tuesday from 3 to 4 p.m. and then as well on Thursdays from 3 to 4 p.m. We'll also have a place on Canvas where you're free to just send out questions that maybe are less personal, that have to do with like your specific research questions that you're addressing, specific questions about your own analyses, and they're just like general questions about course content that might be helpful in posing on Canvas in kind of the more public form, so that when I answer the question, it's also going to help your fellow students. So basically, questions that you're comfortable asking that other people are going to see, post them to Canvas. That way I can answer them and everybody else will have an opportunity to learn from that material as well. Before I talk about the course philosophy, I'll talk a little bit about my own background and how that sort of shaped my philosophy. Like you, I went through SFU's graduate school program. I also went through SFU's undergraduate school program. So I've basically spent like my entire adult life here at SFU. And one of the main things that kept me here at SFU was because I started working on and now are responsible for running as the principal investigator the Incarcerated Serious and Violent Young Offender Study that was initiated by Ray Corrado back in 1998. So I think many of you got to know Ray back in Crim 800, yeah, and then many of you will be taking his Young Offenders class this spring as well. And so this study initiated by Ray was focusing on like the risk factor profiles of youth in custody. I began working on this study, and one of the main things that I was doing was assessing for features of psychopathy. So I would go into youth custody centers and I would interview kids who were involved in serious and violent offenses to get a sense of the extent to which features of psychopathy were present or not present. Over time, I began interested in two main questions. The first one was whether features of psychopathy in adolescence were informative of offending in adulthood. And the second question I was really interested in was, do features of psychopathy change when it comes to youth? When we're talking about adults, very often psychopathy is assumed to be this fixed and stable personality disorder. But we also know that youth are very malleable, they're very pliable, they change a lot. And would this also be true for youth that displayed features of psychopathy? So I became really interested in longitudinal research methods. I was not somebody that was good at stats or math. That wasn't my background whatsoever. My reason for getting into criminology was because, like many people, I wanted to go to law school. I'm sure you're sick of being a TA and having students tell you all about how they are definitely going to law school. But I was one of those persons back in the day until I started on Ray's project. And so I began to learn that really to answer the questions that I wanted to answer, I needed to learn how to use quantitative research methods. So I'm not coming from a place where I was a statistician and I fell into criminology. To me, I'm a criminologist that fell into statistics and that fell into quantitative research methods. I'll be talking about, and I'll get into this in more detail, but I'll be talking about quantitative research methods from the perspective of a social scientist. So I'll be taking a really pragmatic approach to how we learn about these different types of research methods. So going back to psychopathy, I wanted to figure out, can we predict adult offending from adolescent features of psychopathy? And the answer there was yes, we definitely can. And so I wanted to learn about about different ways of predicting offending using different regression models. But I was also very interested in that change component. And so what I also found was that youth with strong features of psychopathy definitely do change over the life course, and this sort of reiterates the importance of not labeling young kids as having features of psychopathy or as being a quote-unquote psychopath. So that's sort of what brought me into criminology and brought me into this research path, and obviously I think I've got a few other research interests as well, but that would be the main one and something that I like to talk about in this course. So with respect to the course philosophy, I'll talk a little bit about what my goals are in terms of what students will learn throughout this course. And I want to reiterate that this is not an advanced quantitative research methods class. Some students are very happy about that, and some students might be disappointed about that because students want to learn the fancy techniques. But my opinion is that we need to learn to walk before we can run. Right now, I can understand how students will feel a lot of pressure to publish because you need to publish to get scholarships, to get a postdoc position or tenure track positions. And so there's like the rush that you need to really learn these fancy techniques. And I think that you can go a lot faster if you start slower. It's the way that I started, it's the way that I was taught by Garth Davies. He taught me for both Crim 861 and Crim 863, and in my opinion they were the two most valuable classes that I ever took during my graduate degree, so I'm really proud to get to teach 861 because it meant so much to me, and I want to be able to pay that forward to other students. And so to be able to understand the advanced techniques that you'll learn in 863, you need to have that foundation of understanding of how statistics actually work at a more like univariate, bivariate, and then multivariate level. So we will go through this order in this class to make sure that we have the skills and the tools to be able to understand these advanced methods. If you don't understand these sort of foundational skills, your ability to implement these advanced techniques may be more limited. It's a real long process, but I think in the end, you will become better at publishing, better at writing, and better at running analyses because you'll know what you're doing. You'll have that confidence, and you'll be able to do things faster in the long run. So very few of the analyses that I actually teach in this class on their own are sufficient for what it takes to publish a paper in a tier 1 journal in criminology. So tier 1 journals in criminology, in my opinion, are the Journal of Criminology, Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency, Justice Quarterly, and Journal of Quantitative Criminology. Different people will have different opinions of what are the top tier journals, but this is my opinion, and I think it's shared by quite a few people. Part of what I want to communicate to students in this course is not just about quantitative research methods, but how to use these methods to publish, how to be successful not just in running analyses, but in writing up your finding. Another really influential class that I took during my PhD was Martin Bouchard's Criminal Networks class. And the reason why I loved his networks class, because it wasn't just a class about networks, it was like Martin Bouchard's guide to how to be successful in criminology. And I want to bring some of that into this class as well, where we're not just learning how to run analyses, how to click and press buttons and understand what we're doing. We also need to know, how do we report this information at an ASC style presentation, or how do we report this information in a journal article? Because ultimately, if we're not communicating our findings well, then our findings aren't as useful. Even though these are not necessarily the more advanced techniques, they're still very important in publishing papers. It's sometimes like the starting point or the first analysis that you'll do when reporting your bivariate results in a results section for a journal article. So there's still the types of analyses that you need to use in papers. They're just not necessarily the most quote-unquote sexy analyses that you'll see in some of the tier 1 journals that we look at. So as I mentioned, I'm a criminologist that does quantitative research methods. I'm not a statistician that does criminology. So a big emphasis for me in this class is pragmatism. I want to teach students not just how to use these analyses, but why we use them, what's the purpose of it, and how do we need to make sure that we develop our research questions and then we figure out the type of analysis that will allow us to address that research question. A big pitfall that students can fall into is they decide that they want to learn how to do a cool new analysis, and then they just sort of drop it into the research question that they have. And it's kind of like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We don't decide on our analysis and then create research questions or see if it fits the research question. We create a research question, and then we need to do our own research to figure out the type of analysis that's most suited to addressing this research question. So that's a big part of this course, is understanding why we use particular analyses and when they're suited for addressing certain questions and when they're not suited for those questions. Because I'm interested in pragmatism, there will be certain things that I don't expect students to know. Unless I explicitly say so, you do not need to memorize formulas. There will be some formulas that I want you to understand, and I'll be very clear in lecture that this is a formula that you need to memorize. You need to understand what's going on in this particular formula. And there's probably not a lot that you'll need to memorize. I'd say a maximum of 10, but I'm sort of overestimating so I don't get in trouble for the final exam later. So it's probably more like 1. Software. Now this is a big academic Twitter debate about what is the most appropriate software program. One of the reasons why I've selected SPSS is just because that's what has been used in the past, but you'll definitely see that there can be a bit of a bias against SPSS. One of the reasons is that it costs a lot of money, but for those who are employed by SFU, it's completely free. So I'll be using version 25. Note that for version 24, it's not really able to provide or conduct missing data analysis. Missing data analysis is not required for your term paper, but we will talk about it. So if you want to learn about it, you need to have version 25. It's very easy to download SPSS. I'll put up a little screenshot video to show you where you go and how you download it. The process of downloading SPSS is very simple. So go into Google, and I usually just search SFU software download. And then you go to software downloads and licenses. And if you scroll down, you can find SPSS. And this is, I think, maybe new that it's free for students as well, because they got the beautiful exclamation mark. You just enter your sign-in details, blah blah blah. Oh, SPSS 26, that's new. I won't be using it because I'm too lazy to download it, but you can do that. And so it's very, very easy. You literally just figure out if you're using Windows, you need to know if you're using 64-bit or 32-bit. I'm pretty sure 99% of Windows computers these days are 64-bit, but it's pretty easy to figure out. I can never remember the steps to do it, but I just Google which version of Windows do I have, and then it tells me the instructions for how to figure it out. You can also download for Mac, but it's literally just clicking on it, opening up, and hitting run. It's all very, very easy. A lot of this stuff is for labs, but it's all very straightforward. If you have any problems, just let me know, but I think that everyone will find this is very easy. When it comes to making that decision about how you select different software, it really can come down to the type of analysis that you need. Certain software programs are better than others at conducting specific types of analyses. What I would say is that SPSS is good for introductory methods, and it's good for data management. So when I'm entering data for storage, I would always use SPSS because it's very straightforward. It looks kind of like Excel, but I think it's a little bit more user-friendly, and syntax can allow us to move through our analyses relatively quickly. SPSS is fine as well for the basic types of analyses that we'll be doing in this class. But as you begin to desire to learn more advanced statistics, I recommend that you learn either Stata or R. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. The main advantage of R is that it's free and extremely powerful. The main advantage of Stata is that it's also extremely powerful. It's more easy to use than R, but it's also fairly expensive. So these are the decisions that you have to make. To illustrate the types of analyses that we'll be conducting in this class, I'll be using data from the Pathways to Desistant study. And this is one of, I think, probably the best longitudinal study of youth followed into adulthood that exists within the field of criminology, in part because it does a great job of blending the inclusion of both sociological, psychological, health factors into the data set. So you're able to look at a wide range of different types of research questions. So students can do two things. They can download this data set so that they can actually follow along with the examples that I'm giving in class. Students can also download the data set for their own analyses that you'll be running to complete different assignments. So if you're interested in this data set, you can find it on the ICPSR website, and I'll put up a little video showing you how to get access to ICPSR. ICPSR stands for the International Consortium of Political Science Research. I think it's political science. Anyway, it includes lots of social science data sets, including a lot of data sets that will be relevant for students in criminology, sociology, psychology, and so on. And so if you're looking for a data set, definitely one that you can use. And I'll provide some instructions as well about how to download the Pathways to Desistance Study data.
Hi everyone, so what I'm going to be showing you now is how to actually access ICPSR and how to download the Pathways to Desistance dataset. And again, it's not mandatory that you download the Pathways dataset, but you might just find that having it makes it easier for you to go through the examples that I'm going through. You can run your analyses and see if you find the same things that I do. As I did not mention in class, the ICPSR actually stands for Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. And so if you click on ICPSR, you'll eventually get to its main webpage where you will need to sign up. And don't worry, it's free. You can see some beautiful fall leaves there. And once you have your login, you can search for a whole variety of different publications. So what you'll want to do is just search for Pathways to Desistance Study, and you'll get to this page here. Now what can happen is you'll look at the released and updated files, and you can decide like, oh, it must be the most recent file that is going to be the most useful. And for the purposes of this class, that's wrong, because the more recent files, especially if you look at the one it's 2017, 1211 here, 1214 here, each scale in the data comes in a different data set. So there's like 55 or 56 different data sets that you have to merge together to have the data. If you click on the 2016-03-14 one, or the one at the very top here, this is the data set that you want to download. So it's very simple. You just click the down arrow and then you can choose the type of data set that you want to download. So I'll select SPSS, it will download, you can save it as a zip file to your desktop, and just be aware that it does take a little bit of time. So what you can then do is you've got your zip file open and you'll see that there are all these different folders. I'll just take out the first three for you and show you what I do. We'll go into the first, and that data.save file is an SPSS file. You can just export it to your desktop. Sometimes it's simple enough just to drag and drop. And I've done that for the first three files already. So I've just labeled them 1, 2, and 3 here on my desktop. And I've opened them in SPSS. And so what you'll see, we've got data set number 1 here. It includes, I guess if there's like 15 different data sets, it'll include about 1/15 of all the data in the Pathways to Desistance study. So it has each of the 15 data sets have all of the same cases. It's just different variables that are being added. So I said 15, but it's only 11. It works just like Excel if you've never seen SPSS before. Our rows represent individual cases, so in this case, individual people, and our columns represent particular variables. So you can see for case ID 4, this individual, you can see that their gender was male and they were self-identified as black. So that button that I just pressed up here is called the value labels button. Normally when we're entering data, we just enter 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, like numbers, but then we can tell SPSS that we want numbers to represent something. So in our variable view here, we can give the name of the variable, a description of what that variable is, and then we can tell SPSS that we want 1 to equal male and we want 2 to equal female. So that's how that works for all of the data. So what we'll want to do to bring the pathways to assistance data together is begin to merge files. And this can take some time, so you do need to have some patience. So we can see the case ID here is 41020. If we open the second data set, I don't know why they did this, but they didn't save the data set in the right order. You can see case ID here is 5788. So if we were to copy these data here and paste it over to this data set, we would be pasting it out of order. So all we need to do is right click on case ID and go sort ascending. Now it should all be in the right order. And what I always do to verify is I copy the case ID from dataset 2, I flip over to dataset 1, I paste it in there like that, and then I just run a correlation analysis, and we should see a perfect correlation. If we did not see a perfect correlation, it would mean that our data were out of order. Case 4 in data set 1 is row number 1, but maybe row 1 data set 2 is case ID 55812. So this is the way that we make sure everything is in the right order. And then we can just highlight the data set, and there'll actually be some overlap in variables, because they include, I think, the different gender and ethnicity variables in each data set. But we can copy. I won't spend the whole time doing this, but we just would copy, go to the end of our new data set, and we could paste into our new data set. So that's what you would want to do to have all of the pathways to the assistance study data. So I know it's a bit of an onerous process, but it will at least help you get familiar with how the data actually work. So while we're in here, I'll just show everyone some brief key details about SPSS. So up here in File, you can save, or what I like to do is save as if you want to make a new data set. If you've been working on a bunch of different data sets, it will show you your recently used data right down here. What you'll most want to be familiar with is really what you're actually directly looking at in these rows in the specific cells. So data view and variable view are the two key features that you want to be looking at. Variable view, I always like to expand this label column so you can see exactly what's going on, what the variables actually are. So you can see the 70th variable here is referring to whether a relative was involved in crime. So let's say that you're interested in this variable. So you want to find it in the data view. So you see, okay, it's called S2 demo FamCrim whatever. So you're busy scrolling and trying to figure out, okay, in this sea of monstrous data, where is this actual variable? The easiest thing to do is just double click right where that 70 is, and it will take you directly to that variable. You can then right click on that variable, and if you go to descriptive statistics, it will provide you output that will give you information on the percent of individuals in the sample that, for example, had a relative who was involved in crime and was arrested. So how do you know what type of variable you're looking at? Some have this little ruler next to it. Some have these little bubbles, like almost type of Venn diagram, but with no real overlap there. If you go to variable view, you can see that these different bubbles and rulers represent the level of measurement of a variable. So if you recall from Crim 320 or courses like that, we will be looking at 3 different types of variables. Nominal variables, which are really like dichotomous variables, zeros and ones, where there's no rank order. Ordinal data, and don't worry, we'll touch on all of this in detail next week, but I'm just wanting to describe SPSS to everybody. Ordinal data are data that we can rank, but we cannot know the difference between category 1, for example, and category 2, or category 2 and category 3. So a very good example of this would be Likert scale data, where say we ask a participant to rate their political views on a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. When we have, say, agree and strongly agree, we don't actually know how much of a gap exists between agree and strongly agree. With scale data, we actually can rank order the data, but we also know the level of difference between category 1 and category 2. So age would be a great example, and we can see this back here. With age, we know that the difference between 17 and 18 is exactly 1 year, and we know that the difference between 18 and 19 is exactly 1 year. So the key here is that with SPSS, the type of descriptive information that it will provide you is all dependent on what the measure has been set to. So if we have an interval level variable and we set it to scale, that's typically what we want. If we right click and go to descriptive statistics, we will get the mean on that scale. So the average age of the sample is 17.05 years of age. If we mistakenly set it to, let's say, nominal data, instead of getting the means and standard deviations, we're just going to get a description of how many individuals in the sample were 15 or 18 or 20. And so what you're looking at here would be useful, for example, if we were interested in looking at descriptives related to gender. So if we look at gender here, we've got nominal data, and we can see for gender that individuals that self-select themselves as male are 1, and those who self-select as female are 2. If we run descriptives, we'll get that useful information about how 86% of the sample are male and 13.9% are female. But I want to go back here to the interval level age data. And what you can see is percent and then valid percent. And you can see here, for example, at 17, the valid percent and the percent are a little bit different. So it's about off by, I guess that would be exactly 2%. What this means is that there are missing data, and you can see that down here. So what you want to do is always interpret the valid percent column, not the percent column. The percent column will be interpreting the percent of individuals that are 15, including the individuals for whom there are missing data. So if we did 150 divided by 1,354 times 100, we would get 11.1%. If we do 150 divided by 1262 times 100, we would get 11.9%. So that's where these discrepancies are coming from. One is the frequency or the percent for the entire sample. The other is the percent for the sample for whom data are actually available. So you're typically always interested in valid percent. So again, very importantly, you can change these things. So if you're, let's say like by accident you had gender set to scale, here you're going to find like the mean for gender is 1.14, and that tells us no real information. There's no such thing as like a mean of gender. We want to have gender set as a nominal variable. If you set it as an ordinal variable, you'd actually get the exact same information as if you selected it as a nominal variable. So the big thing to watch out for is making sure that scale interval level variables are set to scale, and nominal and ordinal level variables are set to their respective category here. One thing that I definitely recommend students get familiar with, although it's not necessary for the purposes of this class, but it will be helpful for you in saving time down the road, especially if you're interested in doing quantitative research in the future, is getting familiar with syntax. Let's say that you were interested in motivation and how this relates to offending. And now you might be interested not just in single item indicators, but a scale to measure motivation. So you might want to sum up all of these different items. How would we do that? So for one, you can go to transform, compute, and you can make a new variable. And then you could one by one copy and paste these into your numeric expression. So you're going to add this variable and all of these variables together. And then you would hit OK, and then you'd have your brand new variable. What I like to do is instead, I'll show you here in syntax, you can write these terms on your own. So we can do, I write compute and write in the new variable. I can write equals variable 1 plus variable 2 plus, and I can just take all of these variables, add them together, highlight, press play, and then at the end of the data set, I would have my brand new variable, and I could look at the descriptive statistics for that variable. So we're going to learn a lot more about this type of thing throughout the semester, but I think exposure is key. Getting to see SPSS, playing around with it, it's key to familiarization to that level of comfort that's going to be necessary to do well in this class. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful and not too overwhelming. But again, just let me know if you're struggling with these things, and I'm happy to help.
When it comes to the readings for this class, the two main sources you'll be looking at are the Garson Blue books and then the Sage Green books. The Garson Blue book will give you all of the core details that you need for understanding the analysis as well as how to conduct it in SPSS. The Blue books will also talk about how to run the analyses in SAS and maybe Stata sometimes, but definitely SAS. You can ignore all of the information in the Blue books that's not focusing on SPSS examples. The Green books provide a more detailed examination of the analyses that we'll be looking at. When you're thinking about studying for the big quiz, the questions that are put on the big quiz will be almost entirely from lectures and from the Blue books. Very little of the quiz will be based on the Green books. The Green books are more to aid students' improved understanding of the analysis being conducted. We will also have a look at some empirical papers that are examples of studies that have used the specific analysis that we're learning about. And I think this is really important. One of the ways that I found I really began to understand why analyses were being used is to actually read about them in practice. So instead of just reading Garson books or Green books, I would look at empirical studies that have actually used that particular analysis to answer a particular research question related to criminology or related to my own research interests. And this really helped me understand why I would or would not use this particular type of analysis, and also what the strengths and limitations of that analysis were according to researchers. And so we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about these empirical papers during the last hour of class. And I'll explain now in more detail how this class will actually be set up. Basically, there are three ways that we will communicate course material. The first is the asynchronous component. And this will be about a maximum 2-hour video that I will upload to YouTube and upload to my media site, and links will be available on Canvas to both of these domains. And students will be responsible for watching these asynchronous lectures prior to the 1-hour synchronous component that we will have. If we are having a week 2 class, the asynchronous lecture will be made available by 11:59 p.m. Sunday before week 2 actually starts. Students will be responsible for watching that video prior to the start of our synchronous lecture, which will be held during the last hour of regularly scheduled course hours. So that's the second part, that synchronous part where we can discuss what was going on in the asynchronous lecture. If there was anything that students found confusing or want me to go over again, that will be the time that we can expand on these key concerns. Following the synchronous lecture component, there will be a synchronous lab component for 1 hour. It's entirely voluntary, but you can just basically hang out on Zoom with your fellow students and your TA, and your TA is there to help troubleshoot different issues that you might run into when you're trying to run analyses for your assignments or for your term paper.
So this is what a typical Crim 861 week will look like. So for the first week, I'll have uploaded this video that you're able to watch on things like YouTube or media site. And so for the week 1 video, you need to watch it in advance of our scheduled lecture for that same week on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, January 6th, we'll be discussing material mentioned in the week 1 lecture video. So you'll log into Zoom for 1 hour beginning at from 11:30 until about 12:30, and then following the lecture there's an optional synchronous lab that will be run by the TA that runs from 12:30 to 1:30. And so then by Sunday night of week 1 I'll have uploaded the week 2 lecture video. And so it's your responsibility to watch this week 2 lecture for our scheduled 1 hour lecture on January the 13th. So we will meet for 1 hour via Zoom to talk about the material that was posted in the week 2 video. And then once again, you will have your optional lab right after the synchronous Zoom lecture discussion.
With respect to seminar participation, it will count for 0% of your grade. And I decided to do this, it's different from years past, but one of the reasons was it's just not as easy to engage in conversation on Zoom, but also I think that participation in a quantitative research methods class is a little bit of an antiquated idea. For one, if you really understand the material and you don't need me, feel free to not show up and I won't hold that against you. If you're not somebody that's coming from the stats or a math or a computer science background, I definitely think that you should be showing up to class. But for example, when I took 861 as a master's student, another student that was in that class is also a faculty member, is Richard Frank. The difference between me and Richard Frank is that I was a snot-nosed first semester MA student, and Richard Frank had already completed a PhD in computer science and was working on his criminology PhD. And so Richard Frank, I'm sure he learned from the class, but whether it was as important that he attended compared to the importance of me attending was definitely questionable. So if you don't have the time, energy, or you really understand the material that's going on, I'm not going to take attendance, I'm not going to check whether you're here or not, but that's not an invitation to skip class, and I think it could be a really big mistake to do so. Other reason why I don't think participation as a grade is as useful is because it's not like we can have too much of a discussion over the assumptions of a t-test. The assumptions of a t-test are what they are. They have not changed in 100 years, they will not change 100 years from now, so there's not much discussion that we can actually have. The participation grade that you would normally receive has been placed onto the weight of assignments, and these aren't weekly assignments, they're once every 2 or so weeks, and we'll be focusing on the type of analysis that we're conducting in that week. The purpose of the assignment is for a student to demonstrate their understanding of the particular analytic strategy that we're looking at. It is also going to be useful because it also kind of builds into the course a way of studying for the big quiz. If you put a lot of effort into the assignments, then you won't have to study as much for the big quiz. The assignments are only worth 20% total. So split over 4 assignments, it's only worth 5% of your grade. It doesn't sound like a lot, so why would you put much effort into it? Well, number one, just because you should take pride in your work, you should want to do well on these assignments, but also it kind of allows you to prepare in advance for the big quiz. If you put the effort into understanding these analyses now during the assignment, then you won't have to work as hard when the big quiz rolls around and you need to study. Students must complete these assignments independently. You're not supposed to be working on them in tandem with another student. You're not going to learn how to do the analyses if you're asking a friend about what they did. Some of these assignments also take a long time. Assignment 3 in particular is a bit of a doozy, so do not wait until the last minute. You should use the lab time that we have each week as a way to get started on the assignment that will be due for the next week. For submission, students will be submitting their assignments electronically via Canvas. When you submit the assignment, make sure that you include your name in the assignment. I don't want to receive 11 Crim 861 week 1 assignment Word docs. Make sure that it's written with your name on it so that I don't have to figure out who's submitting. The big quiz towards the end of the class is all about students showing their ability or demonstrating their knowledge of the different types of analyses that we've learned so far. So there will be some definitions and sort of memory recall, but a lot of the quiz will be based on an ability to interpret SPSS output. So I will provide you with output and you'll have to tell me what's going on, what type of analysis is being conducted, which findings were significant, which ones predicted the outcome variable, and so on. So the test will consist of both multiple choice and short answers. For the class, students will complete a term paper, and then they will also present the preliminary findings of their term paper. And this will be done through a 15-minute presentation, and these presentations will be all done over Zoom. The goal of the presentation is try to simulate ASC style presentations. So like knock on wood, we'll be able to be back at ASC at some point in the near future. And the idea here is to give students time to practice what it will be like to present findings at an ASC format, where really you're spending like 1 or 2 slides on introduction and theory, and then the remainder of the presentation is based on your methods, results, and discussion. We'll talk more in the class about what this ASC style presentation actually looks like. And part of the idea of having you present before you're done your term paper is that it will allow me, as well as your colleagues, to provide you with feedback on your presentation. That will allow you to implement that feedback into your term paper to hopefully improve it. Your term paper is worth 45% of your grade, and all of the details about the term paper are posted on Canvas, so I won't repeat them here. I'll just let you have a look at the syllabus. But the idea is that the papers are going to look fairly similar to what you would see in an academic journal article. We'll be looking for the same type of format and similar in quality. So it doesn't mean that this class is just about running analyses. You're going to have to develop that front end of the paper. How do you frame your research question? How do you frame existing theories and prior research that help contextualize your own research question and your own analyses? Because again, to be successful in academia, you need to not just be publishing, you need to be publishing as first author. And to be first author on a paper, you have to be able to do it all. You can't just be somebody that knows theory or somebody that knows how to run analyses or provide policy implications. You have to be able to do it all. And so the focus of this term paper will be on the whole thing, not just the statistical analysis part. Okay, so that's basically it for our week 1 introduction. You do have some homework though. Your assignment 1 is very easy. You just need to get on it. Get a data set. Ideally, you would have at least 100 participants. You're going to need at least 2 continuous variables and a clear DV, a clear dependent variable. By completing this assignment, you'll be able to get sort of some preparation for your term paper by describing the methodology associated with the data that will form your assignment.
So this is assignment number 1, and this is available on Canvas, but I'll just go through some of the key details with you. And so the idea is you need to get a data set. If you get a data set, it doesn't mean that you have to use this particular data set for every single assignment and for your term paper. But what I do recommend is that students take some time to really think about finding the data set that they want to use for the entirety of the semester. It's really to your advantage. And the reason why is because once you get to know one data set, it's a lot easier to work with it. If you just want to finish assignment 1 quickly, then you'll find some random data set, you'll describe its methodology, but then next time you're doing an assignment, you're going to want to use a different data set that you're going to have to download, learn all about all over again. And so really recommend taking some time to decide what you want to do and then select your particular data set, and I'm absolutely available to give you help with finding data. So you need at least 50 cases, and a case can be a participant, it could be an observation. It has to be like 50 rows of data. And I would say a minimum of 8 to 10 variables. 10 for the term paper is definitely necessary. You'd probably want a lot more than this as well so that you can kind of pick and choose things. 4 variables for the first assignment is sufficient for completing the assignment and getting your A+, but really again, think long and hard about finding a data set, comprehensive list of variables that you're interested in, and that's sufficiently large. Under 100 cases means it's a little bit more challenging to uncover significant effects, especially when we start our sections on multivariate analyses. Very importantly, when you are running your analyses, whether it's for your assignment or for your term paper, you're not being graded on your ability to find significant effects. You're being graded on your ability to perform and interpret the analysis, regardless of whether the effects are significant or not. It's really dangerous to go like fishing for significant effects. In fact, this is kind of like an academic dishonesty example where it's basically you're p-hacking. You're trying all these different things to try and get significant findings. And for week 2, I'll talk about why this is really unethical. One of the variables that you'll be selecting will be your dependent variable. So that's the variable that you wish to explain. The remaining variables will be your independent or explanatory variables that you're using to try and predict your dependent variable. You need to have at least one interval level dependent variable and at least one interval level independent variable. And again, you can change your data from week to week, but I really recommend you think hard now about the data that you want to use, and then you can basically have the ability to use the data set for the rest of the semester. So here are the requirements for the assignment. Hand in a document that has the name of your data, if there's a particular name to the study, like the Pathways to Desistance study, and give a brief description of your data. This includes the time frame, so when were data collected, what are the variables included in the study, the number of observations, so for example the sample size, and add the citation to at least one publication that's used data from that particular data source. Point form is always fine. Then I want you to formulate a research question where you're going to talk about the association between X as your main independent variable and Y as your main dependent variable. You're going to need to know or begin to use SPSS for this assignment. So you're going to open your data in SPSS, and then you're going to run descriptive statistics for 4 of your variables. So one of those variables will be your DV, the other 3 will be any IVs, but at least one of the 4 variables, including the DV, must be continuous. So you'll run your descriptive statistics and then copy and paste your SPSS output into your assignment. We'll talk more about formatting tables later on in the course. You'll then need to run appropriate bivariate tests between your dependent variable and the 3 independent variables. You don't need to look at the association between independent variable 1 and independent variable 2. Just look at IV1, DV1, IV2, DV1, IV3, DV1. And then do the same thing, just copy and paste your output into your assignment document. So you'll have 3 analyses in total, no more, no less. Final part of your assignment is to take some time to interpret your findings. So looking at both your univariate and bivariate analyses, what do you see? Do you see any problems such as violations of assumptions? And if you do see a violation of an assumption, don't worry about trying to incorporate solutions to address that violation. I'll talk about all of this material in week 2. So it's only your job to copy and paste the output. I'll go over how to actually run these analyses. So if you have any more questions about the assignment, feel free to reach out on the Canvas board or meet me during office hours.